Oh, well, it took 10 minutes, but we are.
Okay.
We are there.
Yeah, we are live. The setting up the link. So this takes just a little. Everyone, hang in there. It will be worth it, and it's good that we delayed a bit because people are still joining. So that's always good. Okay. We do have the YouTube link. This keynote is public. So I'm sending the link in the chat. Feel free to repost it or do whatever you want with the link. There it is. And without further ado, I will pass the word to Professor Vinicius Dreja from the State University of Montes Claros. Vinicius.
Thank you, Luis. Welcome, Leslie.
Hello.
Well, I'd like to say some words to initiate our seminar. And in the past weekend, I was watching in Apple TV, the British series Slow Horses, where in the story, a cell of extreme right-wing terrorists, self-denominated Sons of Albion, kidnapped a grad student of Pakistani descent named Hassan Ahmed and threatens to execute him by decapitation. One of the terrorists, an ex-soldier, in the series' sixth and final chapter, guides Hassan at gunpoint through a forest to the site of execution, described by him as a Norman castle. Quoting, "I was 7, maybe 8. It was the first castle I saw up close, all in ruins. You could play around it, climb on it. My granddad said it was Norman, very old, as England could be. Be a good spot for it. As the kidnapper notes, it's an adequate place and medieval method of execution considering your religion." As they approach the castle, Hassan begins to laugh, quoting the dialogue, excusing their French. "What the fuck are you laughing at? You're gonna die up here. That's not a Norman castle." "Yes, it fucking is. It's a folly." "It's a what?" "A folly, a fake." Fake how? It's still a castle. It's around 150 years old, built to look older. Why would people build ruins? That makes no sense. Because they wanted to impress people. Because they thought it was romantic. Because they thought it was English. It is English. It's fake. Seems I paid more attention in my madrasa than you in school. That piece of dialogue reviews essential elements of contemporary political uses of medievalism to weaponize their medieval past, mainly by right-wing extremists in Europe and elsewhere. All that resembles the Middle Ages enables them to project in the past some kind of golden age of their countries in Europe, or of a mythical universal common past of male, white, and orderly Christendom, as in Brazil or USA, for example. This exacerbation of medievalist stereotypes added to the lack of knowledge about the Middle Ages and medievalism, and the massive online dissemination of these discourses contributed to the construction of the volatile national and international contexts currently we have in West, making bad history occupy a huge space in the public consciousness. Perhaps the most important contribution of our conferences is to broaden international debates in this fight against such a situation. So, thank you all, the guests and participants. Without further delays, I have the pleasure to invite Dr. Leslie Cute from University of Hull for her keynote, Medievalist Images and the Making of Meaning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, I hope it's worth it, and I'm sorry for all the fiddling about. That's what you get for trying to use somebody else's computer. But here we go. I have a PowerPoint because I always have a PowerPoint. I will share my screen. I will just open my PowerPoint if I can find it. Right, I hope I have got, I hope I've got that opened. Just a moment, I need to, oh dear, I need to find, there it is. Haha, right, I am onto it, and I am now going to hopefully share my screen. It says host disabled. Oh, right, yeah.
Just a second. Yeah, go ahead.
I can share, can I?
Yeah, you can now. I think it's disabled by default, but I've just enabled. Is it working? There should be a share screen.
Right, I have put on share screen. Oh, it says allow Zoom to share your screen. Okay.
Yeah.
No, where am I? Allow the apps below.
Do you need me to share it? If so, I can. But
here we go. Right now, yeah, it's all right. It's put up a firewall for some reason.
Oh.
Right, I am not. Oh dear. Right, I may not be able to share my screen. Oh, here we are. Hang on. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can, Leslie. It's working.
Oh, thank goodness for that. Have I got a right? Is there a full screen? Right, here we go. Let's see. View. View. Slide only. Is that any better?
Yeah, it's okay.
Ah!
Yeah, that's.
There we have it.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh dear, this is just amazing. Right, here we go. Hopefully you are getting my screen without the people up the corner. Are you getting the whole screen?
We are.
Okay, you're getting the whole PowerPoint image and not just the image with me up the side.
Yeah.
No, good. Right, that's handy then. Okay, I will carry on. Right. Well, here we are. Here's another castle for you. Greetings from Ludlow, which is where I am at the moment. It's not where I normally am, but this is Ludlow Castle. It's originally the seat of the Mortimer family. It's from where Edward V set out to be murdered by Richard III, and where Henry VII's 14-year-old son Arthur brought his new bride Catherine of Aragon, only to die shortly afterwards and leave her to become the ill-fated first wife of his brother Henry VIII. Okay, so this lecture is about theory, about the form and the construction of images, and of neo-medieval images in particular. You might like to leave now, but I must say that I believe that theory, or at least thinking about how and why things work, sets us free and empowers us as scholars and as researchers. So I'm hoping that this will be anything but dry. On the contrary, I'm hoping that it will give you ideas and suggest avenues for exploration that will offer more ways of approaching your own materials. Of course, it's based on what interests me in particular, but that should be translatable, again, I hope it is, to other areas of interest. I'll be drawing on artistic, literary and film theory, and I'll be using examples from a variety of periods. Precisely what constitutes post-medieval is contentious, but for my purposes, I think anything after the dismantling of medieval religious structures in the European mid-16th century Reformation deserves a post-medieval tag. Here are some neo-medievalist images made by my own students as potential film posters and DVD or book covers. The students have been taught to think about what medieval narratives mean, what their major focal points are, how they work, and then to develop these in a neo-medieval format, blending the medieval with modern and other formats and ideas in order to make the material accessible to modern viewers. Hence, we've got manga, erotic and romantic approaches. Neo-medievalist images were and are made and viewed in a wide variety of forms. They can be still, as in paintings and other two-dimensional forms, moving, as in film, television, games and holograms, and three-dimensionally physical, as in sculptures, displays and artifacts or made objects. We can watch them, interact with them, sometimes move around and through them. They are not limited generically either. Most recently, we've seen the influence of digital images as developed and consumed in game worlds, not only in pictorial art, film and media, but in museum displays and in the presentation of medieval buildings, especially where I work, the castles run by English Heritage, and how these are displayed in order to enhance the visitor experience. It's often said that the difference between medievalism and neo-medievalism is that medievalism seeks to reproduce the medieval as it really was, whereas neo-medievalism takes elements of the medieval and of other periods too, and seeks to use them to create something new. That's a bit problematic because we cannot always know how original even a known medieval object is. There are problems of history, of use, decoration, restoration and renovation, translation, transmission, etc., etc. So I've tried to be simple, and in keeping with the theoretical basis of the rest of this paper, I'd like to extend, reframe or redevelop this idea by referring it to the great French language and literary theorist Jacques Lacong. This idea is relevant throughout the rest of the paper, so please stay with me. I slipped this slide in because I just love it. Lacong explains how he went fishing in a quiet rural river with an aged fisherman. An empty sardine can was carried past them in the current. The old man asked, "Do you see that can?" Lacong said that he did, and the old man responded, "Well, it doesn't see you," and laughed. Good joke. The fisherman thought this very amusing, but Lacong thought about it afterwards and applied it to his theories. And I'm not going to go into that because we'll be here all afternoon. To my mind, medievalism is the study and appreciation of the medieval without necessarily bothering whether it sees the viewer or not. It is itself, and that's that. Neo-medievalism, on the other hand, seeks to manipulate, to revise the can so that the viewer and her or his world is seen or acknowledged by it. If you like, we like to recognize something we can understand or relate to in the past, even though our viewpoint has been produced and conditioned by a different world. This is motivated by the desire of the viewing subject, who is the catalyst for the interaction, not only to see the medieval, but to have their own existence acknowledged by it. It wants the can to see it. Everything I shall now go on to discuss, therefore, I shall class as neo-medieval by this definition, and there I shall leave it and move on. Most of us, those who study literature and language in particular, know about Lacong's mirror stage, the stage of life in which the viewing subject becomes aware of themselves as a viewing subject, occupying a particular position in relation to the social, cultural, and ideological and any other hegemonies, what is seen as acceptable or normal by those with the power to enforce those ideas of their world, whatever they may be. This positioning happens as a result of encounters that take place at the marginal interface between the subject and the center, or the symbolic, as Lacong calls it. This interface, which Julia Kristeva calls the semiotique, is a dynamic space, always in motion and always disrupted and disruptive. I like to think of it as being rather like the surface of the sun, as the margin itself seeks to challenge or to affirm, and sometimes both, the hegemonic culture, the hegemonic center. It's now well known and widely accepted that we see these processes in images from the Middle Ages themselves. 13th and early 14th century European psalters, books of Psalms, are obvious examples. The main text is biblical, but in their margins we find the monsters, the entertainers, the peasants, the noble people doing naughty things, some gory body popping, and naked people looking blasphemously like somebody else telling us to keep our hands over our arse. On the outer margins of medieval maps is where the monsters live, and also, according to the Psalter map, which is in the middle there, the mind of God, challenging, instructing, and also affirming the importance of the human world at the center. From the early 13th century map of Great Britain by Matthew Paris, which is on your right there, we can also see that the hidden is marginal too. In the background, the author has noted, there's little red pieces, has noted historical events, existing historical remains, and holes in the ground, caves and other such, which medieval people saw as what we might call visitor attractions, all dangerous points of ingress into his contemporary world from which it could be threatened and challenged. Caves and other gaps held a scary fascination for medieval people, rather like the horror genre does today. They were thought to give access to and from hell, and stories about them occur regularly in Matthew's Chronicles. It's what Michael Camille called the other within, and it's as potent a marginal space as the margin itself. The imagination fills in and tries to make sense of these gaps. Medieval people did this with forms such as forgery and prophecy. We can use CGI. Here we have two images from Ridley Scott Productions. He is very good at this. The first, from Kingdom of Heaven, shows Orlando Bloom in the front here on an actual piece of medieval wall. The background does not exist. It is modern Jerusalem with all its TV aerials, etc., which has been wiped and filled. The second on the other side was by his production company, although it was directed by someone else. And the background, again, the front is actually physically in existence. The background is not. The castle has been added with CGI. Scott uses a combination of what's still there and fills the gaps with an approximation of what ought to be missing, using evidence from what still exists, artistic reinterpretations, and his own imagination. What results is what it should have been like, sufficient to give the viewer the impression that they can really be there. This is a growing trend in film, television, and in visitor experiences. It renders concrete that which is desired, but forever absent, making the scene overall accessible and understandable to the viewing subject. Authenticity is not an issue. What matters is validity. In fact, the medieval town is fake too. It's a stage set built for the programme in Hungary on evidence drawn from a variety of medieval European models. It isn't even in England where the story is set, so you could say that even the set is marginal to where it's supposed to be. But it's valid. As Derrida and others have pointed out, at the centre, Lacong's symbolic itself is neither constant nor original in the sense of being natural or organic. It's simply claimed to be. It's made up largely of elements, that is, semiotics, signs, constructions, artifacts, narratives, images, with their own histories and pre-existing cultural meanings, which are themselves historically unstable. Neo-medievalism supplies a mix of elements from a wide variety of sources, including mostly medieval, but never only medieval, no matter how much the authors or creators claim otherwise. Medieval objects, historical characters, events, themes, narratives, ideas, and ideological imperatives. The range of these is actually quite narrow in practice. It then offers these to viewing subjects who are invited to position themselves in relation to the hegemonic worldview which is being presented to them, not necessarily their own and not necessarily a real one, but one that is constructed by the presenter. I think this is a really important feature of neo-medievalism and its sub-discourses such as neo-Viking and other neos such as neo-Victorian and neo-Georgian, neo-Jane Austen. Indeed, to fantasy and science fiction worlds as well, to a lesser extent or a different extent. It enables the neo-medieval author or creator to create their own symbolic centre and their own marginalia. They can highlight whatever they want in order to encourage their viewer to take up positions in relation to the centre they have created. Because they are constructed from element of worlds that are marginal to or hidden from the viewer's own centre, they permit what to our symbolic may be considered excessive and therefore marginalised, less socially valued, hidden, or downright prescribed. This is a very different form of modern neo-medievalism. Marcia Williams is an illustrator as well as a storyteller, so her images are her own. And what's interesting to me, which I'll show you in a minute, is this context, is her acknowledgement, development, and use of the margin. because her opening pages acknowledge one of the best known margins in medieval European art, that of the Bayeux tapestry. In the tapestry, the original marginal illustrations add value to the central narrative, offering affirmation and extension of its themes and ideologies determined by the Norman patrons, as well as challenges to it by the English workers who made it. You can see here the dismembered bodies, highlighting William's success against the Saxons in the Battle of Senlac. And yet there is also the image which recurs in the margin of Aesop's fable of the fox and the crow, where the fox wants the piece of cheese that the crow is holding. The fox says that the fox insults the crow's ability to sing and says, I was told you had a lovely voice, but you haven't because you're just sitting there. And the crow is flattered into and bullied into singing. It then drops the cheese and the fox lays off with it. This has been seen from the point of view of the gradual stages by which Harold Godwinson lets go of the kingdom of England, which is taken up by William the Conqueror, whose brother Odo is behind the tapestry. However, an English embroiderer looking at this may have seen it as evidence of William's duplicity, and it wouldn't reflect very well at all on William. So there's a dualism going on here, a dual viewpoint. In the tapestry, Williams uses playful illustrations. Here she is. Uses playful illustrations like the quirky little lion heads with their playful expressions drawn from medieval examples, along with, on the cover and the inside pages, marginal scenes where the tapestry has body parts, narrative asides, fables, and beasts of battle. Williams's marginalia affirm the playful and rebellious central stories of Robin Hood. The outlaw and his band challenge the authority of the betters who are supposed to govern them, and their repressive, violent, power-hungry, avaricious and covetous ideals. Williams is drawing and writing for children, and so she has drawn the marginal to the centre, then affirmed its values and its value with the help of her marginalia. The world of rulers and adults is devalued and marginalised. She has created her own symbolic centre in order to challenge, marginalise and replace it. The stories of the outlaw Robin Hood are a good fit as they attempt to do something similar in medieval literature. Neo-medievalism is then a very powerful tool. It reaches back into the past, molds, manipulates and represents it as truth, and the future receives it as truth. It is a discourse, an instrument of power. It can be a very powerful one. Discourse is a way of using language that provides an exclusive and specific way of talking about and viewing a topic or topics, and of positioning the speaker and listener or artist and viewer in relation to it. Stephen Copley puts it better than me. I normally don't read the text on slides, but this is quite important, so I'm going to. Each discourse develops a characteristic vocabulary, establishes a particular order of priorities in its discussion, and implies particular ideological valuations of the subjects it has defined. We can identify the characteristics of a discourse. We can begin to understand texts constructed within it. This is also true for images, as they too are texts constructed within discourses. In our case, the same neo-medievalist discourse as literary and other texts. If neo-medievalism is so wide-ranging, with such a large thesaurus of potential elements to choose from, and allows for the creation of new symbolic centres and margins, why are many of the images created so samey? Here are the images of Winterfell and King's Landing from HBO's Game of Thrones series. Many of you will have seen this, well known now. The way in which Winterfell's fortress appears to have grown out of its landscape, its practicality, and its apparently self-effacing lack of adornment, the natural religious emblem of its red heart tree, that speak of feudal hierarchy and family in a setting that may be grim and violent, because it's grim up north, but one that is grounded in its place and its people. We guess that a traveller might find protection there. The image of King's Landing, however, shows a constructed landscape whose very warmth and sun-kissed shoreline, its Mediterranean civilized and orientalized, almost erotic overtones, leads the viewer to expect corrupt politicking, pursuit of profit and lack of ideals, lustful immorality, and knives in backs. A traveller would probably get tricked, mugged, and even murdered there. All of this, a Western European, more precisely Anglo-American, audience reads from the image alone. Others from different cultural viewpoints might not see it the same way. But for HBO's and George Martin's audience, a powerful discourse of neo-medievalism is in play. John Burrell has an explanation for this. The discourse within which we make an utterance determines to a large extent the nature of the connections that we can make between ideas. It determines, for example, what can stand as the cause of an effect and what can be claimed to be the effect of a given cause. In terms of neo-medievalism, these connections had a history long before J.R.R. Tolkien created his Middle-earth, although he definitely influenced their trajectory for those who came after, as Martin's Ice and Fire series shows. Warhammer's game worlds have also had significant influences, including on the HBO images for Game of Thrones, particularly on the opening credits, I have to say. Discourses are both a tool and a weapon, positioning their elements in order to create truth and power, relationship first described in detail by Michel Foucault. Neo-medievalist images tend to cover the same subjects and include similar elements, setting up similar relationships between causes and effects, because this is how the discourse has come to behave, historically, according to previous usage, as well as from the historical, social, political, artistic content of the elements. For instance, power structures are frequently feudal and hierarchical. Power within them is based on wealth, especially landed wealth, acquired by accident of birth, sometimes aided by a bit of murderous self-help, and physical violence, sometimes with a bit or a lot of political chicanery thrown in. If this is questioned, the reply is that this is what it was like. But actually, it's what the discourse has come to say it was like. In most neo-medieval scenarios, men are men and women are women, although non-violent men are weak, marginalized groups of men, LGBT plus men, have to prove that they aren't weak, usually by fighting, maiming and killing people, and or by excelling at tricksy politicking. Most women, unless the women also prove themselves to be like men, are weak too. There are exceptions in film, for example, including Hildegard of Bingen in Vision and Andrei Rublev in Tarkovsky's film of that name, whose strength is spiritual. It's about surviving and keeping a hold on their integrity, although they are portrayed as marginal figures in a stereotypically neo-medievalist symbolic world around them. Societies are unstable. Bodies need to be muscular and physically powerful for even intelligent characters to succeed. In film theory, following the definitions of Pearce and Woolen's highly influential work on signs and signification, we start with the images as icon, index, and symbol. By this definition, the image is what it is, as icon, but has a history of use as that particular image. Or it can call to mind an idea or ideas with which it is associated, as index. or it can symbolize something else, in which case, as symbol, it is arbitrarily related to something else, not by any natural relation, but by some form of convention. Simple example, here's a sword. It's a weapon for killing and maiming. Swords are expensive, so it would have belonged to a member of a warrior elite. It could therefore stand as a synecdoche for that class. As index, it's associated with chivalry, with nobility, with violence, and perhaps with all the qualities of the knightly class. In neo-medieval film, it often symbolizes family inheritance, patriarchy, and the father. As ice in Game of Thrones, and Balian's father's sword, which then becomes his in Kingdom of Heaven. The sword is everywhere. There's always a sword. It follows from Old English and the sagas, of course, so it's not a new idea. Images are a good way of investigating the workings of discourses because, as Roland Barthes tells us, they have a particular way of creating meaning. They have a general overall meaning, which Barthes calls the studium, but this is created by what I like to call points of light or enlightenment, which he calls puncta, or points, that work together to create the general overall meaning of the image as a whole. These puncta are selected and placed within the general image so as to engage the viewer's attention and their emotion. We can see Barthes' theory at work in this painting by William Hogarth, completed in 1759, within 4 years of his death. He's best known, almost entirely known in fact, for his often biting contemporary social satires, in which he often focuses on those disadvantaged by poverty, class, sex, or age. This is the only medieval subject he's known to have painted. Because Hogarth paid so much attention to making detail matter, this painting shows Barthes' theory and its operation well. The story is taken from the Decameron of Boccaccio, the 14th century Italian work said to have inspired Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. For those who know the Decameron, it's day 4, story 1. Gismonda, the widowed daughter of King Tancred, falls in love with Giacomo, one of her father's servants. They meet in secret, but are caught when her father pays his daughter an unexpected visit and finds them together. The lovers are separated, but Tancred decides to put an end to his daughter's rebelliousness by having her low-class lover killed and sending Gismonda his heart in a golden chalice. Hogarth's picture shows the moments after Gismonda, who he calls Sigismunda, has uncovered the heart and knows to whom it belongs. The pearls, lace, and rich textiles demonstrate Sigismunda's status and the wealth of her family. Indices of wealth and femininity are the chief puncta in this setting. The rest is dark, shading from brown to black, emphasizing her loneliness, the darkness inside her, and the black oppressive hegemony or symbolic center of the world in which she lives. The solidity of the rich marble table shows the power, solidity, and rigidity of the social structures which create that symbolic, typically neo-medieval center. Details show that things are wrong, however. The diamond coronet that shows her wealth and her position in the social hierarchy is slipping and in disarray. Her perfect skin is flushed with grief and marred by her tears. She hugs the chalice to her own heart, the synecdoche representation of her lover. But of course, the chief punctum in the painting overall is the bleeding heart, the vulnerability of its soft tissue, highlighted at the point where it meets the hard gold, the chalice in which it sits. This meeting place of fresh flesh and material, the major feature of neo-medieval images, but one I won't have time to discuss at this point. And yet, in typical Hogarthian manner, the center is defied by the margin, and the marginal is brought to the center. Sigismunda's tears and the look in her eyes are as defiant as they are mournful. Originally, the heart's blood covered and stained her fingers in the foreground. Hogarth had to paint over this in order to make the painting more acceptable. Another gesture of defiance and the inability of the centre to control the margins challenge. The story tells us that she then sprinkled poison onto the heart and drank it from the same chalice as the blood, in defiance of her unreasoning patriarch of a father. The overall studium is not, therefore, what it might seem at first. The choice of a neo-medieval image is important, because it strengthens the power of forces which would have seemed evil to an Enlightenment viewer, as to us, even if the actual medieval background isn't there. The background is just dark colour. Viewers fill it in, like CGI, according to what the discourse of neo-medievalism as they know it suggests to them. It moves the guilt, if you like, away from us, and yet the challenge is to the contemporary world also. It implies you're no better. Incidentally, the painting was never sold. It was exhibited briefly, but Hogarth took it down after 10 days, and it's still one of his least known works. I'm going to just have a drink, and this is just a pause point at the centre. I go on. Index and symbol are forms of metonymy, that is, the representation of physical detail to invoke associated ideas or ideologies. It's extremely important in art, including media arts, and the metonymy of physical objects is very important in neo-medievalism, where social power is defined by the richness of physical objects, including textiles and costume, and the hardware of military culture. This also includes thematic and narrative referencing. And this includes reference to other historical and literary events, including current ones. The sword's presence on that poster in the same field as King Arthur would cause many to automatically call it Excalibur, although there's no reason it would be, other than in literature and customary usage. Director Antoine Fuqua was told that he had to include the hero pulling a sword out of the ground in the film because that's what was expected, although it ruins the film's narrative and looks plain silly. Here's a metonymic example that isn't silly, although in the case of the second image, it was plain dangerous. As already noted, the mixing of components in neo-medievalism challenges and troubles the symbolic centre, but by metonymic extension, it can also trouble the hegemony outside the image. The first is a still from Michael Curtiz's Adventures of Robin Hood from 1938. Prince John, played by Claude Rains, is plotting the assassination of his brother King Richard with the aid of a bishop and the noble villain Guy of Gisborne. The characters are seated in a dark, almost black dungeon with the flames of their fire filling the foreground. John wears a black tunic with a self-pattern and silver accoutrements. Colour and setting are customary language for Hollywood villainy of this type. In the second image, French veteran classical acting legend Jules Berry is presented by director Michel Carnet, himself a French cinematic legend, as Le Diable, the devil, in the film Les Visiteurs du Soir, the night visitors. The film's narrative tells of two damned servants of the devil who roam around seducing good people to their deaths so the devil can take their souls. The young male visitor predictably falls in love with his young female victim, and the devil turns them to stone. In a climactic final scene, Berry's devil discovers that the lovers' hearts are still beating within their stone statues. The film was presented in 1942 to an audience in occupied Paris, which included top Nazis and Hermann Goering himself in the front row, whose ministry had provided the finance. Goering was entirely satisfied and enthused about the film, which of course was essentially only a lovely romance to the Nazis in the audience. For the French, with a blonde-haired, blue-eyed heroine. For the French, it was intended to strengthen their resolve to resist occupation, to dream of and to work for freedom, i.e. the heart of France represented by the young blonde girl, Marie, although she's not called Marie, she's called Anne, the heart of France was still beating. Berry's devil wears a black tunic with a self pattern. He has a rather perky, strange-looking hat. Later, Carnet revealed that this was intended to get as close as he dared to SS uniform. Curtiz was a Hungarian Jew working for the Warner Brothers, also Jews, with a musical director who was also a European Jew. The film does contain other references to the situation in Europe in 1938, was at least partly intended to persuade Americans to provide military support for the Allies. Looking back to Raines's costume, Curtiz seems to be working along similar lines. Raines did shortly afterwards portray a Nazi officer in Curtiz's 1942 film Casablanca. By extension, not only actors, but well-known characters such as King Arthur, Robin Hood, Richard the Lionheart, set up a reference within the image to the totality of Arthuriana, Hoodiana, Crusadiana, whatever, and so on. The trysting tree in the Robin Hood legend is called upon in these two illustrations over 200 years apart. Berwick's illustration for Joseph Ritson's 18th century edition of Robin Hood stories and Marcia Williams's representation of it both show traditionally as a meeting place for outlaws. Ritson's book speaks to what has been called the English radical imagination, the 18th century evocation by social and political radicals of pre-industrial society as a challenge to the new feudalism of industrial capital, whilst Williams sees it also as a place where those marginalized by their society, in her case, young people, both illustrations claim the historical continuity of Robin's legend for these functions. Williams is also referencing the major oak in Sherwood Forest, claimed by the Victorians as Robin's tree, which can still be seen and imagined to be the tree, although it isn't, and visited by her readers today. Imagining outlaws telling stories whilst telling their story places both the storyteller and the viewing audience under the tree with centuries of others. In other more theoretical words, neo-medievalism selects particular structures that fit within the nature of the discourse. For example, fighting and violent battle scenes, erotic romances, cruel power struggles, treacherous diplomacy, family dysfunction, generally borrowed from the major themes of medieval romance narratives, together with the characters that stereotypically inhabit them. And these structures become synecdochic. That is, they represent the whole neo-medievalist output of similar scenes and characters. This is why secondary critical works are so often frequently arranged with the same chapter headings. Genre also affects this, but it is neo-medievalism as discourse that determines it most fully. The link strings of neo-medievalist metonymy can be short and direct, or they can be quite long. They include the serious and the playful, or both. It's a signification that works. Almost everyone has an idea of what getting medieval means, even if those understandings are not the same. It's a signification that sells, but only by selecting materials and understandings that are widely known within the target audience. Here we go, down the backstretch. As you saw from the montage I began with, my students love book and DVD covers and poster art. These are useful because they break down the overall understanding of what a text is really about, its studium, if you like, and split it into the most meaningful component parts that make up that overall meaning. If you please, the puncta. These book covers for George R.R. Martin's massively successful first Song of Ice and Fire novel are arranged chronologically. The first is pre-television. The image captures the icy cold north and uses it to create a chiaroscuro effect that highlights the figure in the foreground, a romantic barbarian warlord derived from late 1950s erotic romances, typified in England by Mills and Boon. The bird looks like a hawk, extending the promise of erotic excitement presented by the human figure. It's a raven, of course, but that doesn't matter. A fortress smokes in the background in order to show that the knight, we assume, and his world are desirably dangerous. No indication he's any particular figure from the story that follows, but the potential audience will understand the references. The second was released at the beginning of the HBO series before it became world famous. The animal heads are stark wolves only, and the sword image indicates violent struggle. The seawater background may indicate Danny's journey, but this is out of keeping with the rest of the image. Does, however, suggest sea voyagers with swords and lots of fur, so it's likely to really be referencing Neo-Viking. You can tell someone in film, games, or other neo-medieval images is a neo-Viking because he wears a large furry animal on his or her back, carries sharp pointed and bladed weapons, has lots of facial hair or simply lots of hair, lives in and around lots of wooden artifacts and buildings, and wears clothing in earthy colours. Old people are ancient warriors, sages or witches, and younger people are marginalised until they prove themselves. Usually by being streetwise and or powerfully or craftily violent, or all of the above. Even when such characters are not specifically Viking or of Scandinavian origin, the discourse identifies them as particular types of people living in particular worlds. The third cover was released when the HBO series had gained many millions of followers and spawned a worldwide spin-off industry. Literary and cinematic imitators, playful fantasy games, and cosplayers. The background appears to be parchment, but it's also a sandy colour. The only artifact is the dragon sigil, made to appear like an archaeological find, a sword or a sceptre. The series' most famous character by this time was Daenerys Targaryen, and the link to her house sigil of the dragon, along with the scorched desert landscapes she initially inhabits, is what sells, most likely to people who know the series and now want to read the book. Game of Thrones has come a long way in terms of commercial artwork, and yet the neo-medieval symbolic imagined by all of them is still based on somewhat similar understandings to those of Hogarth's audience in the 18th century. And here are some neo-Vikings and their world. Who's cuter, Jon Snow or the cub? The dog, the dog. So playfulness also informs the commercialization of the neo-medieval image. And I'd like to end with a different form of advertisement. A few weeks ago, I was in Nottingham, where I walked past Trent Bridge Cricket Ground, the home of Nottinghamshire County Cricket Club. In South America, cricket may not be very well known or known at all. But it's an essentially rather daft game that was invented by the colonial British and is still largely played by colonial British countries or former British colonies, although it is growing around the world in new forms. This is the home of Nottinghamshire County Cricket Club, who are known as the Outlaws for short. The posters are inviting cricket fans to buy season tickets for the 2020, the best supported and thus the most lucrative series of the club's summer. The club's strip is green with yellow detail, including their badge of a stag's head, alluding to nearby Sherwood Forest. Club cricketers on the posters take up positions, throwing balls, catching balls, and swinging bats that draw to mind famous images of Robin Hood shooting his bow, although within a format that is very often used for sports posters in this country. An enticing message speaks to the neo-medieval background, the association of the medieval and neo-medieval outlaw Robin Hood with the city. There's a famous sculpture of Robin and his outlaw gang outside Nottingham Castle, very well known. Be more outlaw, an invitation to be more like Robin and his merry men or women by buying a season ticket for the summer's games in advance. The invitation is similar to that of Marcia Williams's Robin Hood tree, Come and join the centuries of men and women who have been part of Robin's band. But in this case, you buy in. Unlike Williams's illustration, it's being used for commercial gain, an inversion of what Hood's outlaws are really about. And so this paper has come full circle, I think, from scriptural marginalia to carnivalesque sports crowds dressing up. But to my mind, they all lead back to the neo-medieval image and the world it represents, something that most people in the Euro-American world think that they know something about, at least. Also, to my mind, that makes it really important to have usable, workable theories about how it works, not only to understand it better ourselves as Euro-Americans, but to compare Euro-American neo-medievalism with others in the global Middle Ages, or maybe better to say global middle period, because the idea is that it's between the ancient and the modern. So what's your neo-medieval, and does it work in the same way? Shall I end I need to end my screen share now.
Yeah.
There it is.
Okay.
I've done it. Sorry, yeah, I went on for nearly an hour because of the length of time of the session.
Yeah, that's great. Vinicius?
Well, thank you, Leslie, for a great presentation and very provocative. Some things we will never forget, like as Umberto Eco had said, always everything leads to the Templars and to the Nazis.
Yes, yeah,
We can't get rid of them.
And Jesus slapping his backside, yeah.
Always. Well, I like your idea, your discussion about the near, as well, it's the third Middle Ages, so about Middle Ages, medievalism, neo-medievalism, and the category you presented to us. It's very challenging. It speaks directly to us Brazilians, because we fit chronologically in this, how can I say that? Well, category it serves to my thought, and I want like to hear a little more about it.
A little more about what precisely?
Well, I can't remember exactly the term. Well, it's not
about being in the middle.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well. Yeah. Well, the point is that in Euro-American, well, no, I can't say Euro-American. In European terms, the Middle Ages is called Middle Ages or medieval. It was called that in the 16th century by Renaissance humanists who thought that there had been the classical world, and now they were reinventing the classical world, and the Middle Ages was the bit in between, which is, well, and they thereby sort of attempted to wipe out or write out or marginalize, in fact.
But their
2,000 years.
time is the near Middle Ages.
Yeah. So, but I think by definition, that's what they tried to do. So they are saying this is the modern world and that is the classical world, and there's this dark age in between, which kind of was not like us. although it made us, we don't want to know that. It's kind of like, not like us, we're going back. I just wonder, I think everybody has a different middle period. And you might say, you could say, well, that's the classical period, and this is the now, and we're actually living in the middle period, because medieval people thought they were living in the end of the world. They didn't think it was the middle period. They thought this was the end. And then it turned out that, I mean, Matthew Paris's map I showed there was actually a Joachite. He thought the world was going to end in 1260. And he didn't, unfortunately, live to see that it hadn't. So what is your middle period? You could be in what you could think you are in one now. I think this is part of the idea of global Middle Ages, that you must define your own middle period. Yeah. So if you think that, I don't know where Brazil is now, but if you think you are no longer in a middle period, then where is your middle period? If you think you're in a middle period, then that's fine. You're having your Middle Ages. I think it's for other people to work out. I can only speak as an elderly English woman who has basically grown up within, I don't know what we are. If the Renaissance thought that they were now and the Middle Ages was middle, then what are we? Yeah.
A long perspective.
Maybe we are now neo-medieval.
Yeah, the category of neo-medieval, as I tried to put it, it's very close to us Brazilians. Our colonial history begins in the near medieval. We have a absurdly enormous debate about Brazil had a Middle Ages, chronologically don't. However, culturally we have elements, and it's a mess.
Well, imperialism. I mean, personally, I would suggest that imperialism and colonialism is medieval. I would suggest that you're no longer in the Middle Ages. I would suggest that I don't know. I mean, it depends how you think about your president, really.
Yeah.
Maybe you're fighting to get rid of the medieval. I don't know.
Yeah. I think we're closer to the end of the world than to the Middle Ages, maybe.
Maybe we all are.
Now, indeed.
Yeah.
I think the question for Brazil and maybe the US and other, post-colonial nations is, do we need the Middle Ages? Or should we just maybe figure out our own chronology? And the middle makes sense for Europe. Maybe it doesn't make that much sense for us. I don't know. Yeah. And that's in itself to work that out, because scholarship on a lot of scholarship has been colonial and therefore European based. It is good to be post-colonial, not post-colonial, to reject the colonial altogether, and to say we don't need that, and then build one's own. I think that's, it's not right for Europeans and the descendants of Europeans to look at other people's histories and say these ought to be like ours, or to even to compare them with their own. You're not the center is,
as I was talking about, the center has changed. The center changes. Your symbolic is what it is and what you create. It's different. The point about neo-medievalism where I am is that you can use it to set up a central set of values and structures that you can then criticize and tear down. But that may include something of yourself.
Yeah.
It's a way of pushing. It's a way of pushing the guilt away, and it's a way of pushing the bad things, predicating them on a different world. But actually, as Hogarth Sigismundus says, you know better.
Unfortunately.
Also, just reminding everyone, we're open for Q&A now. So if you have a question, you can either raise your hand or ask it through the Q&A box or through chat, whatever you wish. If you raise your hand, I can add you to the panelists section, so you can open your camera and speak up. And I think that's the best option. But if you're shy, or if you may be insecure about your English, you can always type and we can translate it as well. Yeah. So you can ask the question in Portuguese.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. If you want to ask your question in Brazilian or some other language, then please do. And I trust Luis to translate it properly.
Yeah,
there are some people I don't trust.
I've just promoted someone. I'll promote Angela as well already because she's the next one.
Oh, okay. Hello, Karen.
Yeah. Karen, go ahead. You should be able to. Your mic is not connected though. So maybe.
Hello, Angela.
Hello.
Yeah, I think we can put Angela ahead because Karen seems to be having some trouble with her mic.
Okay.
Angela.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leslie, for that fabulous talk and so many things to think about. But I was really interested in one of your closing statements that everyone knows what getting medieval means, even if they don't all agree on the meaning. And thinking about that in a global context, because I wonder, I think absolutely, of course, we don't all agree on what medieval means. Talk to a white supremacist and one of us and we'll have very different notions. But to what extent might you comment on that, sort of, even if they don't agree on that meaning in a global sense? To what extent is any global notion of getting medieval so heavily influenced by the sort of European paradigm because of colonialism? And to what extent is it able to be a kind of a local understanding of any place's own middle, as you understand it, whatever that middle may be? And I love that sense that everybody has a Middle Ages because we're always between something, some past and some future.
Yeah. I have this awful feeling that the use of just the word medieval is a colonial exercise. I try not to use it. I use it in the context of talking, particularly also to my own sort of Euro-American colleagues, but I am embarrassed by it because I think it contains unacceptable influences. It's like the language of Americanization, and I love, talking about Ridley Scott, I love the image of the Pepsi sign in Black Hawk Down. Everybody, people in Africa know what golden arches are. I find that depressing rather than, and embarrassing, rather than, they know what Levi's are. People in Ghana know what Levi's are, when they've got a fabulous textile industry of their own. And even to say that, I, as the heir of the Georgians and the so-called Enlightenment, I cannot use, it's like everything's a pun. I cannot use modern American, British terms. I can't even say anything like that without pulling up colonial unacceptable references. I'm a prisoner of the discourse of my ancestors as much as anybody else's. Does that help? I mean, I try to use the term middle period because I think middle period is, as you say, everyone's got one. It's useful for everybody, and it doesn't posit me as a 60-year-old British woman. Who
I guess I just sort of wonder if you know, sort of a double-sided thing. If certainly there are always these discourses of somebody, but are places in the kind of global world who engage in a kind of neo-medievalism or in making medieval or getting medieval inevitably tied to a discourse of ancestors who are not their own, as in the kind of European colonialist notion of the Middle Ages that has traveled with Europeans out of Europe, and which I think as medieval literature and art or history professors, we fight to some extent in our classes all the time, or whether there's any ability to draw on their own local histories, you know, their own colonial periods as a kind of medievalist discourse that might be valuable or useful.
I mean, history as we receive it is a form of, you know, I've received it as neo-medievalist discourse. And the way I speak about it is how I have received it as neo-medievalist discourse. If we see that neo-medievalism is a form of discourse, then we can say there are other discourses. And that may help us not to use it, or it may help us to put it in its place.
Or could it become a methodology to invent other sorts of discourses that, you know, sort of run on this framework of using the past and reflecting the present in the past? So, thank you so much.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, now to Karen.
Yes. First of all, I would like to compliment you, Mrs. Colt, on your wonderful presentation. I'm from Brazil, and I would like to ask you a question. Whether those medievalists, those medieval guys from the past were aware of the circulation of images among them.
I mean, pictures are everything in
yes, in terms of pictures. Yes, in terms of iconography.
Yeah. I mean, they understand it. They understand what they're supposed to see. They understand what they're supposed. Particularly, one of the things I didn't have. I mean, I only had 60 minutes, and that's really too long to keep talking. So that's why I've sent a transcript, because you can go back to it. I mean, one of the things I didn't have time to talk about is one of the main ways that we get neo-medieval images is through religion. And one of the oldest and most pervasive neo-medievalist images, the Madonna and Child, for goodness sake, which is actually late antique, isn't it? But you know, it's come that the accretion of meaning is a form of neo-medievalism, and they understood that. But we get it wrong when we see I mean, some people see that these things were always the same. I mean, the crucifix is different and seen differently through long periods, and the Madonna and Child are presented and seen differently. It's like the symbolic is never the same. The face of the sun is always moving, you know, it's always dynamic. You know, okay, so Jacques Derrida is right. It's go back to theory. It's always moving. Christavis semiotique is always changing, and so they had different. You know, they are told when you go a long way back. It's just who's doing the enforcing, who's doing the suggesting, who's making the meaning, and going back to what Angela just said, I mean, the meaning can be made locally if you don't have wide links of communication. The meaning can be made by people locally. So, but it's still conveyed in image and action, and the interplay of image and action and word, which in the early period is largely spoken word because few people can read it and it's probably in a different language. But by the English 15th century, for example, which is some manuscripts that I've just been looking at, it is in language that people can understand. There is a fairly good amount of literacy for the period, and a lot of people can read it. A lot of people can receive images. More people have leisure, more people have money, and it is linked to the ability to absorb images and to enforce meaning from the center. So by the time you get to the end of the Middle Ages in my country, image is still really important, but it's image and word together very often. Pictures in churches often have little speech bubbles or scrolls, you know? And so the understanding that people are reading it, but they read the image first, then they can read what they're saying, or they can read the text underneath. And so it changes, but yeah, they use image a lot, and read image a lot in their world. And it's also things like they read colors, and they read the significance of clothing and this kind of thing. Image is, and we call that image now, don't we? You know, that's my image. So yeah, images are really, really significant in the actual Middle Ages. Then they become less significant in Europe in the so-called Enlightenment, when it's all about the word and people are Protestant, and therefore it's about the word as Bible. And nowadays, of course, it's gone back to being image and word and image. The image has become hugely significant again, and people understand very quickly. I mean, like those reading somebody as a neo-Viking takes half a second, you know, if as long as that, because it's the discourses of the image have become much more understandable again and are being used much more widely. We're saturated with image, as they were.
Yes.
Is that
yeah,
any good
yeah.
as an answer?
Yeah, it's perfectly clear. Well, another idea I have is in a world prior to Gutenberg's invention, right?
Yeah.
So images circulated, because you can see that there are points in common by looking at images from different places. So I believe it must be assumed that images circulated somehow without Gutenberg's invention.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, the iconography of the image was firstly really brought to people's attention by Émile Malle in the Gothic image. Yeah, I mean, the church is spread across Europe. The medieval church is like a great big computer network with nodes of power.
Yeah.
At various places, and the node is where you flick the switch and the power comes on. Images, icons have a form of power that is switch flicking, you know. and priests and church representatives in local areas can tell people the priest has a tremendous amount of influence. They tell people teach people to understand what images are. They learn at school. They learn in the little room above the church porch how to read a picture. And they learn in church from the pulpit how to read the picture. And then they go on to read more and more and more pictures. So yeah, I mean, the church in particular can spread the meaning of pictures right across Europe and right across the world.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have more questions? Again, you can raise your hand, you can type in the Q&A box, or you can type in chat. And you can type it in Portuguese or Spanish or English. And if you raise your hand, I can add you up here so you can talk, just like we had the previous two questions.
Or you can email me later.
Also always an option.
Or chat, put it in the chat box, because I shall be at other people's panels too.
Because we still have 20 minutes, so there is still time, people, to ask questions if you have. Otherwise, we can always.
Yeah. Oh. If not, you can have some lunch.
Yeah, we can always end a bit earlier, but just double checking. This is your, oh, someone raised a hand. Sabina. Okay, I will promote you to panelists, so you will be removed and added again. Just a second. Yeah, there she goes. She should be back. Yep. No.
Ah, Sabina, hello.
That's a great profile picture, by the way. Very neo-medieval.
Yeah. As my mother always used to say when the crowd scenes came on the television, I know him.
Well, most of the reason I came on as a panelist right now is to say hello. But I also wanted to talk to you about what you were just saying about the interplay between the image and the word, and how that changed in, I guess you're saying in the Enlightenment. One thing I noticed—
kind of.
Yeah. One thing, because I've been teaching medieval literature and I don't know very much about it, but I was thinking that the image-rich language came in at that time as well. Like, so there was a lot of evocation of imagery in that time, because there was less, I suppose, emphasis on the image at the time. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, well, I think it's partly to do with the public school emphasis on classical text and stiff upper lippiness, and the image is the street sign, and it's just the difference between using it for practical purposes and being snobby about it. A lot of, well, to go back to Hogarth, a lot of his material has street signs on it, and he shows a lot of well, he's very visual, and he shows of course the point about him as a painter is that he was trained by James Thornhill, the foremost epic painter of his day, and with whom he fell out because he wanted to paint large classical canvases like Thornhill did, but for some reason he didn't do that. I mean, that he quarreled with Thornhill because he ran away with his daughter, which didn't really help. But so the lesson stopped, you know. But what he does is he takes the camera and he turns it round on the crowd, on the viewers, and then he paints the crowd as epic. So he paints ordinary people as epic, and part of that world that you see is a lot of stuff like street signs, and it's very pictorial. I think his audience understood it really well. I mean, I think they could read pictures. I think it's just admitting that you can or can't. It's kind of it's being an intellectual snob because you went to Eton or something. I can't imagine somebody like Carlyle admitting that he knew how to tell which of the streets had brothels in, you know, by reading the signs, but he jolly well could, you know. I think it's what largely I think it's affectation, because the world is still it's always been image based, but the word gets more credibility, if you like. It's also back to that word validity, I guess. Yeah, but it's the word has more credibility, and it is put out by intellectual. It's the sort of high-low culture thing. Is there high culture and low culture or not? And is that a construct? And of course it's a construct, but if you're constructing yourself as cultured, then you wouldn't say, oh, I go out and read pictures. But if you're being honest, you'd say, I like going out and reading pictures. You know, Hogarth painted series that people subscribed to and put on the wall, you know, and that they moralize, and they're all full of pictorial references, and that some of them are quite emblematic. They read like emblem books almost, and people could do that. Yeah, you're right. I mean, people could do that. But if you're trying to construct yourself as high cultured, then maybe you wouldn't admit that you like doing that. But certainly we're less sniffy about I like to read comics. You know, it's I love the Beano. Everybody who's anybody loves the Beano. You know? But if you were an 18th century public school educated, politically acceptable schoolmaster, then maybe you wouldn't say, I like to read Punch, or I love those Gilray cartoons. But they did. I don't know if that's any. I think it's to do with fashion and what is considered to be. What is symbolic, where you put your symbolic and where you don't, you know. And obviously somebody like Hogarth's symbolic is not in the same place as his teachers. but I'm kind of, yeah, I mean, I think it's all to do with what you want to be seen to be doing and what you want to be seen to know. You know, I know middle-class people who go to raves, but whether they're going to jump up and say, oh gosh, yeah, I went to a great rave last week, and I really love grunge. Yeah. I don't know. I think it would depend what audience they were in. Oh, is that any use? I don't know.
Oh, it was lovely. Thank you.
It's great to see you, and congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, we have a question in the chat. I would like to ask about the importance of, oh, okay, the importance of the, I don't know the exact term in English here, so please.
Oh, have a go.
But it's in Portuguese it would be support, but in English, he means the material in which the image is based. Like, is it in a book?
Oh yeah.
A manuscript, a stained glass window. So
yeah, I get that. Yeah.
The importance of the basis, I guess, the framework, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
So in the sense that
it's physicality.
Yeah, the importance of this technicality in the construction of meaning in
I see, yeah.
etc. And if the new technologies change the image that is perceived as medieval.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is the last one. First of all, yeah, you have to. You can't necessarily fit what goes onto a poster on a, I don't know, on a postage stamp, but so you have to tailor what you are saying to fit. On the other hand, you can usually do that, but you may have to use other means. So if it's a sculpture in a church, then what you're saying will look different if you put it onto a page of a book, but it will still have a certain similarity, or you'll find a way of doing it. It could be that the audience of the book, what it is, that the audience of the book is different from the audience of the poster, or the audience of somebody visiting a medieval castle, or children, or reading a picture book, or somebody playing a game. It's to do with, like the book covers, it's to do with who the audience are, and the form often changes the audience, who can afford whatever it is. I mean, that one thing about digital, one big point about digital art and digital media that people make is that it is exclusive, in terms of it can only be accessed by people who have the right equipment, and that costs money. Therefore, they have to belong to a certain class, or they have to be in a certain part of the world, etc., etc. And people who produce something for that audience, for that material, physical base, are going to produce for that audience who can have it, basically, and produce for people who receive it. People who are producing something for people who are visiting a medieval castle will produce something for people who are prepared to pay the entrance fee and can afford it. So the audience is sometimes affected by the physical form. what you can actually put in, the form in which you can put it. The discourse is the same, but the form in which you can frame it and the elements you can use may be different according to the medium that you are using to present it. I suppose the other point that you were making about digital, and that's a point that I often think about, and I'm not sure, I mean, will it change? The idea that we can now produce holograms, for example, that English Heritage, for whom I volunteer, are very keen on holograms at the moment. And so they have audio-visual holographic displays, for example, in Conisbrough Castle, not too far from where I live. And these are filmed images, recorded images of people dressed in particular clothing of a particular medieval period that appear to walk and talk around the room. I find that very spooky. I don't like it very much, but they appear to ghost around the room, but they look very physical. And visitors really like this, apparently. But if you can, let's take it further, and if you can produce holographic images amongst which people can walk. I mean, you can walk through a time tunnel now. They have one at Teesside University. You can produce Chaucer's London, or street in Chaucer's London. You can walk through it, and you can produce holograms who will speak and walk around it. But I'm not sure how that. I think that is going to change the way that we interact with the past. I think it's going to change our view of the past. And as Mark Kermode, the film critic, sometimes puts it, not in a good way. I think it may change some things in a good way, but it may not be in a good way. And I think that will be something we will see over the next 10 years. If I live for another 10 years, then I expect I should see it. But I suspect that will be something that we are going to see over the next 10 years, particularly it will start in commercial applications, because it's always about capital. It's always about selling something. And I think we will possibly see that in advertising situations, you know, like those Robin Hood ads and those King Arthur ads will suddenly come to life and walk around us, or walk between us. Yeah. And also in settings where people are selling a visitor experience, as is happening now in Yorkshire, in my own county. York Minster are doing it, York Clifford's Tower are doing it, and in York Castle. There's a certain amount down south in Dover Castle, but Conisbrough Castle are doing it in a big way and marketing it. I think there will be, I think that's where the developments will be, where people use it commercially. And I think then how we see the medieval, how we see the past will change according to that. I'm not quite sure how that will happen, but certainly CGI is now acceptable. CGI is now everywhere. When Ridley Scott first started using it in things like Gladiator, it was a big thing, but now we've got whole films, almost the entire movie made of CGI, we've got ABBA performing on stage as youthful avatars. Oh my God. You can go and see the Rolling Stones as themselves in person. So why go and see ABBA as avatars? But there are, I mean, there are so many implications to this in the way that the imagery that you see in digital gaming, for example, has now come to influence so much. It happens imperceptibly, and then you realize it's happened very quickly. And I'm not sure I want to go and meet William the Conqueror. I'm not sure I want to go meet Henry V. He'd be a real bore, but Edward III would be fun. I'm not sure, do you want to go and meet Hernan Cortez? I mean, I don't know. Montezuma might be fun, yeah. But maybe not for a Brazilian.
Yeah, but okay, we have
with the love Montezuma and the Aztecs has for fresh hearts. I really don't think so.
Yeah, let's play the ball game. Oh no, sorry, that's the head game. Oh, that would be marvelous, wouldn't it? We have a 3D hologram of people playing the head game that you could walk amongst.
And the cheers, grabbing the head.
Yeah, but that would be a horror show by itself. That would be fun.
Yeah. And among other things, of course, let's go to an orgy.
Sounds more interesting, at least, than the head game.
There you see, I brought it down to my own level.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left, so I think we're done with Q&A, unless someone has a very, very quick and objective question. Which, oh yeah, my glass is empty, and it's water, by the way. No drinking till Friday.
Yeah, I have some of that too.
So I would just like to thank you, Leslie, a lot, and Vinicius, go ahead and do the outro.
Yeah, right. I'd like to once more thank Leslie and thank também also to Angela, to Karen, to Sabina, well, to join us in our questions. Well, and for now, we can proceed after lunch with the first. É o ST agora, né?
First session is Medievalism and Literature 1.
Yes.
We have 2. And usually 1 comes before 2. Usually.
Oh, well, thank you for coming, everybody. And I hope I didn't bore you too much. I'm really sorry about all the fuss at the beginning.
Oh, that was great. And
it's fine.
Nothing to be sorry about. It was good to give time for people to join.
Yes.
And yeah, see you all after lunch. Also, we have another guest roundtable this afternoon with Carol Robinson, Dan Klein, Kevin Moberly, and Lucas Grybowski about medievalism and gaming. So that will be fun as well. And yeah, everyone, a final round of applause for Leslie. And see you soon.
Okay.
Yeah.